morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio, the podcast where we talk with writers about their lives, their craft, their business, and their latest work. I'm your host, Charlie Lovett, and our podcast is sponsored by Bookmarks. Bookmarks is a literary nonprofit whose programs include the largest annual book festival in the Carolinas. Come visit Bookmarks at our community gathering space and nonprofit independent bookstore in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Inside the Writer's Studio is also proud to be an affiliate of Libro FM, the audiobook platform that supports your local independent bookstore. Stay tuned at the end of the podcast for more information on Libro FM and a special offer. My guest today is Megan Miranda, who will be joining me in Winston-Salem at the Bookmarks Festival of Books and Authors on September 23rd to talk about her novel, The Only Survivors. Megan, welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to talk about our industry a little bit for a minute. We have, like a lot of industries, we have our big influencers, our people who are kind of helping people decide what to read. They're podcasters, they're TikTokers, they're celebrities. You were chosen for the Reese Witherspoon book club. Talk a little bit about how people like her have shaped the publishing industry.
Yeah, it was such an incredible experience and a huge surprise as well. I've been, a longtime follower of her book club as well as a lot of other ones as well. I feel like they're a way that they use their platform in this incredible way where people who may not be familiar with your type of book or gravitate towards your type of book, suddenly it's put in front of them as a possibility. And I feel like they're picks that a lot of book clubs talk about, and it, grows the audience in really incredible ways and connects you with different readers and readerships. So it's been, I'm someone who follows because I feel like as a thriller writer, I gravitate towards thrillers for the most part. And, following the Reese Witherspoon book club and Jenna Bush and Good Morning America and Oprah, you are presented with many different types of books that, maybe I'm not aware of, and it breaks me outside of my comfort zone. So it was really an incredible experience, both as being chosen and as a reader as well.
And do you think in addition to those of us who are habitual readers, for a better word, who, like you said, they may be introducing us to authors that we don't know. Do you think they're bringing new readers in as well, who maybe aren't used to reading, but then they see a celebrity say, it's worth your time to read this book?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think it's broadening the types of books maybe that, maybe you see your first one from one of these book clubs and then you follow and are introduced to historical fiction or nonfiction and different types of books. So I think it's really broadened readership in general.
Yeah. Now you have, if I'm correct, you have a group of fairly close writer friends who support each other, who inspire each other. Talk a little bit about that group and how that has become a part of your career and your writing process.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate that I have several groups of writer friends that I have known for over a decade. And I think we kind of started around the same time. My first books were YA, and I met two other writers. We had the same agent, and we were all starting at the same point. Didn't really know other people in the industry and didn't have other critique partners. And we met and started reading for each other and brainstorming. And they became, several of my closest friends to this day. We get together several times a year. We don't only read for each other, but we just kind of will sit around chatting about ideas and brainstorming. And they're also two of my favorite people to read. I just love their writing as well. And in addition, that's Ashley Elston and Elle Casamano. And now we all also write adult thrillers. And I also have a very wonderful group of writers in the North Carolina region that I've known for the same time. And we try to get together a couple of times a year as well, and just talk about industry things and writing things. And especially when you write, writing is oftentimes very solitary. Getting to get together with other people in the same industry is always so fun. And one of the things I love about festivals too.
Yeah, it's one of the things we like the most about Bookmarks, both the festival and just what goes on in general. And my listeners can't see this, but the room I'm sitting in right now, hopefully you'll be here soon because we'll have the authors' dinner here at the house, and that's a great time for exactly what you were saying, just to break out of that solitude of writing and spend some time with people who are doing the same thing. You mentioned that you started out as a young adult writer. And now you're writing books for maybe not so young adults. But tell us a little bit about how does your knowledge or your expectation of who your audience is affect the way that you're writing?
That's a really good question. And to be honest, I'm not sure if it really affects the way I'm writing in a conscious way. Um, because when I was writing YA and wrote my first adult book, I wasn't thinking to myself, okay, now I'm going to shift what I'm doing and write a different type of book for a different type of audience. It was more that the story idea I came up with felt more suited to a character who had this element of hindsight and was looking back at something that had happened in their past. And it was really just about filtering the story through a different perspective. And as a YA writer, I was also a big YA reader. And I know that there is a lot of crossover audience. So the thing that I try to really stay true to above all is just the character and the story they're telling and the perspective. But I don't think the way I approach it is necessarily that different. I write first person. And so it's really just about, in the young adult headspace, that feeling of immediacy and maybe experiencing things for the first time, figuring out your place in the world versus filtering these things through maybe decades of lived experience that have colored the way that this narrator is presenting the story. But I don't think there's that much difference, honestly, between what I write in YA and adult other than the main character.
And you talked about audience crossover. Have you had interactions with readers who came to you as young adult readers, but who are also now reading your adult fiction? Do you have that kind of crossover?
I have, yes. I've heard from people who discovered my books in high school when I was writing YA, who are now adults reading my adult fiction. And I've seen the other as well, where people have discovered my adult books, see that I've also written YA in the past, and have gone back and read some of those as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's talk about the latest novel, The Only Survivors. Tell us, it's always tricky talking about thrillers because we don't want to spoil things for the readers, but tell us a little bit about this novel and especially the sort of the situation at the beginning of it, the setup.
Yes, I totally agree. It's always hard. Like, how much can I tell before you're like, dun, dun, dun. So The Only Survivors is about a group of former classmates who were the sole survivors of a tragic accident that happened about a decade earlier. When they were seniors in high school, they were on a class service trip. And the vans that they were riding went over the edge of the road in the Tennessee mountains. And they crashed into a ravine with a raging river during a storm. And they were trapped there for about 7 hours. And by the time they made it out, there were only 9 survivors remaining. After this event, they made a pact that they were going to come together every year around the time of this anniversary in order to check in on one another, keep each other safe, so they claim. And they get together at this house in the Outer Banks, which is supposed to be this place of solitude and safety for them. And the book begins on the 10-year anniversary. And now at this point of the original 9 survivors, there are only 7 remaining. And another has just gone missing on the first day of the retreat.
So,
and then dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. You mentioned it's set in the Outer Banks, which of course is here in North Carolina. You and I both live in North Carolina. Can you talk about just sort of, not necessarily with reference to this novel, but just in general, the importance of setting and how do you choose a particular setting? And in particular, also, how do you use our wonderful home state and all the different settings that it offers us?
Yeah, I love settings. I love talking about setting, and especially I think every genre setting is so important, but I think, with thrillers, you can really dig into the atmosphere to make it like a character that's a little bit creepy on its own as well. I always approach every setting that this could be the most beautiful place in the world or the most terrifying.
Mm,
And the only thing that changes is your frame of reference in that point. And most of the characters in any of my books are either living in a place or going to a place because they love it. And it is a place of safety or a place that they feel secure, whether that is a house in the middle of the woods alone or, a bustling neighborhood or the mountains. And in this case, they choose this house in the Outer Banks because it is so far from the site of their past trauma, which was in the Tennessee mountains. So for them, this is a place that no one can reach them. They are cut off from the rest of the world. It's just them and they're safe. And I love the Outer Banks. It's absolutely stunning. I love that you can see the sunrise and the sunset, and there's kind of water surrounding you on all sides. And yet, when things turn creepy or things start to go wrong, it's also the type of place where those same elements can almost turn against you because in a storm, it is a very isolated place and it is difficult to get out. There's sort of one main way in, one main way out. And now all of these kind of elements of isolation can turn against them because now they're not necessarily safe somewhere, they're trapped somewhere. And there is a storm that approaches while they are there. And, it's just them and they don't know whether they can trust one another. So I always approach things that way. I love the settings of North Carolina. I didn't grow up here, but I've lived here for 2 decades now. And I feel like during that time, there's always a new place to explore. There's just so much that North Carolina has to offer between the mountains and the woods and the oceans and everything in between. And my editor always jokes that I'm either setting a book near the water or in the woods. And I go back and forth every time. And my next book is like by the water in the woods. I feel like there's so much that you can do with that. It's a type of like nature as a setting and having a mind of its own as a character. It's very powerful and you can use it in a lot of ways.
yeah. And I do love the fact that they had this very traumatic experience that was very much about water.
Right.
And then they choose to go to this place of safety that is, as you said, completely surrounded by water. So
right.
There's a great irony there. Now, the house itself that they go to is this house called the Shallows, and the Shallows itself is a survivor in many ways. Tell us about how the house reflects so much of what is happening in the novel. As you write, the Shallows was not a place that kept secrets.
Yeah. So this house, the backstory is that it had been owned by one of their survivors' families, and it was a rental that's been in this house for potentially generations. And at the start of the book, you realize like this house has withstood hurricanes. This house it's one of those that's raised up, but the ocean is right there, and yet somehow it survived. But you can see all of the traumas kind of on the surface. It's also a place where, there are 7 people staying in this house and you hear everything. You can hear someone walking above you. You hear doors opening and closing and water running in the pipes. You hear people like walking on the deck. And there's, I think the beauty of a lot of these homes on the beach is they have these big windows and you can see out and you can see straight to the ocean. And yet at night, all the lights are on and whoever's out there is watching back instead. And so there's this idea that you're looking out at things, but then in another situation, everything kind of, you're almost in a fishbowl as well.
Yeah. Now as you said, there are 7 characters who experienced this accident 10 years ago. Who come together at this house, but you had to pick one of them to be the main character in the novel. Why did you pick Cass? Why did you pick her as the primary character through whom we are going to see so much of this novel and whose story we are really the most closely connected to?
Yeah, so I usually, when I start, I have like a main character in mind, and that was definitely the case with this book. Cassidy was the voice I heard first and started writing immediately from her point of view. And I think I'm always drawn to someone who's a little bit straddling a world, whether they're part insider, part outsider, feel like they don't quite fit in. I feel like it's very interesting to explore that character, but also it's a way in for the readers, um, because she is kind of on the outside of this group and she considers herself probably the most unlikely survivor. This was not a group of friends who were on this trip together. Everyone was on this trip for a different reason. Some of them were friends, some of them were dating, some of them just needed service hours to graduate, some of them were part of this volunteer trip. So they're very different personalities. And Cassidy really was not friends with any of them before the accident, and yet has found herself bound to this group of people for better or worse. And they've all become very different people because of this tragedy that's happened in their past. It's really shaped the people they've become. But she's able to see both the before and the after, and tell the reader a little bit about who each character was before in the past and who they've become now. But they really only see each other once a year. And so you're only really seeing the version that they're presenting this 1 week a year, to one another. But Cassidy, for me, she's always been a little bit on the outskirts, feels like she's not always noticed, and therefore is a very keen observer of everyone else.
Yeah, yeah. And now we could ask this question of any of these seven characters or of all of them. But for now, let's stick with Cass, because you kind of hinted at it a little bit. But how did the accident, the trauma of 10 years ago shape not just the facts of her life, but how did it shape her personality, her character, her identity, as to go through that trauma at such a formative time of life, right before you're starting to become